Foreman, the Krays and their firm were arrested. Ron and Reg Kray were eventually sentenced to life imprisonment with a recommendation that they serve at least 30 years. Charlie Kray and Freddie Foreman were both imprisoned for 10 years for being accessories in Jack McVitie's murder. Many believed that it was the end for Foreman, but many clearly did not know the man.
The whole objective was when you reached a certain age, you would want to hang your gloves up and retire. I was 37 by the time I've got the first 10-year sentence. The judiciary know that that's your dangerous time from your early teens, 20s and 30s to 40s. If they can lock you away for 10 stretch of that, it slows you right down. Unfortunately, I was still at it when I was 54 years of age.
When Foreman was eventually released, he predictably returned to the only business he knew, crime. At 10:30 in the morning on Easter Monday 1983, 6 masked men broke into the Security Express depot in Curtin Road, Shoreditch. They tied up and blindfolded the guards and doused one in petrol in order to force him to reveal the combination of the safe.
I want to question Foreman in connection with Britain's biggest ever cash robbery at the City of London offices of Security Express in 1983, when an armed gang tied up security guards and got away with £6 million.
News of the audacious robbery stunned Britain. However, slowly but surely, the gang was tracked down and arrested. John Knight and Terence Perkins were convicted of robbery and sentenced to 22 years each. James Knight, John Horsley and William Hickson were sentenced to 6 to 8 years for handling the proceeds of the crime.
4 of the gang have already been convicted. Police looking for the other gang members have made frequent trips to Spain's Costa del Sol.
Foreman and his firm, which included Ronnie Knight, Clifford Sachs, Johnny Mason and Ronnie Everett, had been living in what they believed was the relative safety of Spain. Pursued by the Spanish authorities and the British press, they became known as the famous Five. After various attempts to extradite the men had failed, Foreman was unexpectedly arrested by Spanish police in 1989 and bundled onto a plane bound for London.
Well, to come out of my apartment and go into the car when they kidnapped me, took me down to the police station in Marbella, and then they banged me up in a cell with all the drunks and smackheads and things, and then they said my lawyer was there because I'd been fighting the extradition. There was no extradition, and I entered the country on my own passport legally, and I did nothing wrong in Spain. There was no reason for them to extradite me or the police to arrest me, but it was totally illegal what they did. And they just forcibly took me out, and they said, there's my teeth marks on the door frame of my bayonet. That's their joke. That's the Guardia Civil. That's their joke, not my joke. They said the Foreman's teeth marks are still on the door frame of the neck where they tried to get me out. I was hanging on to everything. And then when they got me to the police, 100 mile an hour, they were going 90 mile an hour down the motorway. I tried to crash the car and everything, with the driver, and I was handcuffed, so I couldn't do much. And then when I got to the airport, I broke away from when they got me out the plane, drove me straight on the tarmac underneath the plane. The plane's waiting to take off. And they haven't got a passenger on the plane, and just a plain empty plane. And when I got out and I went over the barrier back into the airport, they chased me and caught me, brought me back again, carried me up the stairs. I kicked them, got my foot on the stairs. We all went down the stairs from the top to the bottom and landed on the tarmac again. Then they got very angry with me, the Spanish police, because they got injured and they was punching me in the privates and one thing and another.
Dodgy airlines, eh?
Yeah. And when they got me face down on the plane, on the floor, one very considerate male steward, come up to me and said, "Here, Mr. Foreman, have a drink of this." And he gave me a beaker of drink. I thought it was in August, sweltering hot, and I thought he was giving me a drink of water, and I drank it down, and then I tasted the bitterness in it, and I realised the bastard had doped woke me, he drugged me. He'd give me the knockout drug, and I don't remember much after that. I know they carried me down, and the 2 Spanish coppers were sitting next to me all the way back to England, and I was still handcuffed with my hands behind my back, and that caused me, I had to have an operation on my wrist. As you see the scar there afterwards, his hands were turning black, you know, with the been laying on them all the time, and they woke me up. They had to wake me up at Heathrow and shake me and wake me up, and then I saw this Fred Cutts coming towards me. He's an ex-yard copper. He's an ex now, he's retired now, but he was walking towards me with a string of other coppers, and they took me off the plane in my shorts and my t-shirt, and there was a bank of photographers all around the airport, all taking photos of me, and on the news that my grandchildren was back over in Spain. They were saying there's Papa Fred there on the news, on the Spanish news, you know.
Foreman was charged with the robbery and handling the stolen cash, but to this day he professes his innocence on both counts.
I was charged with the robbery, but there was no evidence whatsoever, and I was charged with handling money from the robbery, which could have been money from another robbery. It was stated in the charge sheet, cash from the Security Express robbery, right? But there was no evidence that cash, what they found in my bank account, some of it was distributed in an Allied Irish bank. They found 360 grand that had been gone through the bank, but they never found nothing else. That was all the evidence there was.
At trial, Foreman was found not guilty of the Security Express robbery, but guilty of handling the proceeds of the crime, for which he was sentenced to 9 years imprisonment.
I was found guilty of handling this cash from the robbery, which wasn't the cash from the robbery anyway. It was other money, what I'd sold, properties and things that, so the money, I never proved it, so I went for appeal. It cost me a lot of money for my defence, what I had to pay for, and then it was on my appeal, I should have won the appeal because there was no evidence to prove that money came from the robbery. And but they deferred it for judgment, and they found some poor fucking Chinaman out in Hong Kong, and looked through the law books, the Archbold's book on law, and they traced this Chinaman in Hong Kong who had been charged with a robbery and receiving money from the robbery, so that set a precedent which covered my case. So they let the 10 years sentence, 9 years, they give me a 9-year sentence, and it stuck. So I had to serve out the sentence, the whole sentence.
Involved or not, by the time Foreman was a free man again, several of his friends had been murdered or imprisoned after dabbling in the drugs trade. The underworld Foreman had once inhabited and controlled was no more. Drugs had poisoned the minds of villains and destroyed any traces of honour, loyalty and respect amongst them. To Foreman, respect was the oxygen of his world, the benchmark of every man. In his absence, these core values had ceased to exist. However, Foreman's reputation remained.
Because they called me the Undertaker and the Eye Executioner and that's in the East End and all things like that, you know. I come to the conclusion that all I wanted, looking back over my life, was respect. You want to give your children a good education, and which I did. I gave my 2 sons a private education, private boarding schools, and acting and drama schools, and you know, and they never had a job in their life. They never had to work because they worked for me. And none of them went to prison or got any time or anything like that, or got a criminal record. So I achieved what I set out to do.
Now in his twilight years, many will applaud the fact that Foreman and his ilk have retired. Many others will mourn the passing of what they see as the end of old school villainy. Foreman has few regrets, and despite his advancing years, it is apparent to anyone that meets him that the beast still resides within. Regardless of opinion, Frederick Gerald Foreman will never be forgotten. His place in history is secured. Brown Bread Fred will always be one of Britain's most infamous gangsters.